30 years ago, I set out 3 objectives that I wanted all people to experience. The first objective was to identify your style, identify how you do what you do. My second objective was to identify, understand, and appreciate others. I really put an emphasis upon appreciating others. You know, as kids, we sort of grow up pointing fingers at people who are unique and different. We make fun of them in some cases. But think about a team that everybody was identical. You really have to have differences to make a team. And therefore, we need to start appreciating having people that are unique, different from us, and bring different things to that team so that we can really operate as a team. Otherwise, what you have to be is all things to all people. So we need to learn to love our differences. But before we can learn to love them, we really must understand what it is they bring and the value of what they bring. So those first 2 objectives, one was to identify self. The second was to identify, understand, and appreciate others. But now that we know that, we really must move to the next step. How do we work together? How do we communicate? How do we understand each other better so that we really can be a nice unit and communicate all the time, either at home, at work, or any place that we interact with other people? Now, I could not accomplish any of those objectives unless I would have run across the book Emotions of Normal People. William Moulton Marston wrote that book in 1928. And the Emotions of Normal People has set the background of DISC. Marston was way ahead of his time. He was an entrepreneur. He did many things. And I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing his oldest son at his home and ask him questions about both his father and his mother. You know, Marston went on to develop the Wonder Woman comic book. But what I really found out when I interviewed Pete is that it really was the mother behind the scene. And Marston is the one that got credit for all that. I'd also like to point out that Marston wrote the book The Lie Detector. Many sources give him credit for inventing the first lie detector. And I read that book from cover to cover, and he made one statement that really impacted me. He said the lie detector would be better used to change personality than to incarcerate people. And what he was talking about is once you know you cannot lie to me, I can work with you. The behavioral assessment allows us to get inside of people's head, to let them know that we know a lot about them. They really can't fool us because we know how they do what they do. And the minute you get inside of their head with that, you're able to work with them and accomplish many things. And better yet, they are able to accomplish many things by understanding themselves. So self-awareness has really been around for a long time, but now we're clarifying the real importance of self-awareness. Again, with behaviors, DISC, we can actually look at and measure how a person responds to each of the 4 dimensions. And by looking at each of those 4 dimensions and how they interact with each other, we are able to really determine the how you do what you do. Behavior is how you do what you do. But you know, knowledge is the biggest modifier of behavior there is. And so knowledge of self through the assessment process allows you to look at yourself and say, wow, I didn't know I was like that. Is that how other people perceive me? I don't want to be perceived that way. Hey, I'm going to make some adjustments here when I'm around certain types of people on how I interact with them. So this knowledge of self through this process really can impact people's lives. We also need to look at motivators. Motivators is what initiates behavior. Let's say I wake up in the morning and say, wow, I want to go make some money today. Well, I'm going to have to call up old friend DISC to get out of bed and go down the way to accomplish what motivates me. In other words, motivators by and of themselves are just a good idea or a goal, but we must use our behavior to accomplish those things we want to accomplish in life. DISC really should be defined as the universal language. A D is a D is a D anywhere in the world. We've validated this. Now, the percentage of Ds varies from one country to another, but the behavior does not change. So it really is a universal language that once we understand, we can apply it worldwide. Also, we need to understand there's absolutely no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. There's no way you can fail the behavioral assessment because you're a normal person. We're talking about normal behavior, nothing but normal behavior. And the better you understand that, the more you can help people. It's not what style you are, it's what you do with what you are. I came up with that years ago, and one of my friends at the college, who was an English professor, told me that that was not the right way to make that statement. You know, I have not changed because it really sends the message that I think is very important to people. It's not who you are, it's not what you are, it's what you do with what you are. And through this understanding of self, we can actually make enhancements in our own life and the lives of other people. Now we really need to come to grips with how do we define who you really are with our behavioral assessment. To start with, we have 24 questions. You must respond and rank things from 1 to 4. 1 being most like you and 4 being least like you. Now, the 24 questions are basically the same question asked 24 different ways. We've disguised it so that we can get this. This is how you get validity, and specifically, this is how you get dependability and reliability built into an assessment by asking that same question over and over again and getting people to tell us about it. There's 384 different personalized reports that can be generated with TTI's concept. Most of the other people in the marketplace do not have the ability to actually take it out to 384. They may stop at 16, some may stop at 24, different varying things because they really don't understand the uniqueness. And this uniqueness comes as we go through here and understand the whole concept, understand the graphing, and then understand how we read and interpret those graphs, not only for you, but from the computer standpoint. When I first started using DISC, everybody was talking about 3 different graphs. Graph 1, Graph 2, Graph 3. Graph 1 was the graph that you adapted behavior, or it was your response to the environment. When I go to church on Sunday morning, I shut up, I sit down, I listen. I'm adapting my style. If I did not adapt my style, I would actually give the sermon and take up the collection because I'm using my natural talents. So here's giving you an example of how we must adapt our behavior, and we do it on a natural basis when we just recognize the importance of other people or the importance of a meeting or whatever's going on. But we got to realize that graph 1 can change. We can adapt different behaviors, so it could change between the office and at home. I remember one time I had run a group of managers through, and a month or 2 later, I met the spouse of one of them. She came up and gave me a big hug. And I said, well, what's that all about? She said, you taught my husband that he could leave his D at work. He did not have to bring it home to run the family. What a change in their relationship. And I thought, wow, that happened accidentally. I didn't talk to him about that. But he learned to adapt his behavior. He learned the importance of adapting his behavior at home with his family. So let's talk about graph 2. Graph 2 is the real you. It's the least changeable. When we talk about graph 2, we call it the real you because you've actually decided based on who you say you're not. We analyze what you say you're not and actually interpret that into who you really are. That'll come a little bit clearer as we go through this program here. But graph 2, we need to understand that's the real me. When you're under stress, can you adapt behavior? People come up to you and say, what are you so mad about? And you say, I'm not mad. See, you really can't adapt behavior when you're really under a lot of stress. That's why we call it the natural you. I also do want to match you up to a job based on who you really are, your natural style. Now, your natural style could change over time if you experience a significant emotional event. But it really takes a significant emotional event where you assess, who am I, what do I want to be, and then you could possibly bring around a change. I know good friends of mine that are psychologists have tried to change people's behavior for years. It's hard to change other people's behavior. If you want to change your behavior, you can do it, but plan on taking anywhere from 1 to 2 years to bring it about. Because while your behavior isn't totally carved in stone, you have to have somewhat of a foundation. Otherwise, you're all over the place, and we all need a foundation where we're comfortable and where we can be totally relaxed. In 1984, I first computerized DISC. Part of the report came from Graph 1, part of it from Graph 2, another part from Graph 3. Wow. When we found people adapting major change in Graph 1, it distorted the information in Graph 3 to the point that it was not accurate. So our research said that Graph 3 cannot be accurate unless what you see is what you get in people, that they're really not adapting behavior, and there are people in life that don't really adapt much behavior. Their Graph 2 is what you'll actually see in Graph 1. But we had to get rid of Graph 3 because we did not know what was really going on in people's lives. It was not valid, and it sounded like we were talking to somebody that totally was not even in the building. So Graph 3 was eliminated based on research back in 1984. It's very important to understand how the graphs are actually plotted. Looking at Graph 1, the adapted behavior, all the zeros are at the bottom of the graph. And every time you pick an adjective as describing you as most, or giving it a 1 or a 2, we move you up on that scale. So you start at the bottom, 0. Every time you say I'm bold, we move you up 1. You say I'm demanding, we move you up another on the D scale. We could repeat the I, S, and C, the same thing. So you're floating up on those 4 factors as you pick those choices that are describing you. On Graph 2, the zeros are at the top of the graph, so you're all things. What we want to find out is when you tell us that you're not something, we move you away from that factor. So you have 24 times to tell us you're not something. If that happens, you become a 0 on that scale. At the very bottom, you will not even see a bar. What is the chances of you not being that if 24 out of 24 times you've actually picked that as not being you? So you can see the real validity comes as we move people down from those factors. Again, it's important for you to note, we have removed the plot points and things from our graphs because in this competitive world, most people follow us. And as we make changes and improvements, we don't want other people to actually steal all of those ideas. Another important point I really want to point out to you, even though I've been doing this for over 30 years, I guarantee you I'm still learning. And that's a beautiful thing about what we do. We have a chance to be in continuous learning for the rest of our life because we're dealing with the most precious thing on earth, and that's people.